All right, eighth grade reader leaders, welcome back. This is take two. So hopefully you were able to get some information for your take one. Right now, we're about to go ahead and look at pages 13 through 15. As you are listening to my voice and following along, you should be looking for character details only for Miss Stephanie Crawford, Calpurnia, Boo Radley. And if you want, it is optional to look for a few for Mr. Radley. You don't have to, but these first three are definitely crucial. There are not really any important setting details, but if you see them, you are more than welcome to jot them down. Awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. For take two, you are going to go ahead and get to page 13. When you get to page 13, you're going to go ahead and get your pen or pencil on the first word, but that is the beginning of the second full paragraph on that page. I'll wait a minute until you're able to get there. But there came a day. When you get there, say, got it, Miss Martinez, just so I know. And as a reminder, you are working silent and solo. This is the only website that you should be on. I'm not going to be reading along in my book. You are listening to my voice and you are following along in your book. All righty, let's go ahead and get started. But there came a day, barely within Jim's. Oh, go ahead and move that book right there for y'all. But there came a day, barely within Jim's memory, when Boo Radley was heard from and was seen by several people, not by Jim. He said Atticus never talked much about the Radleys. When Jim would question him, Atticus's only answer was for him to mind his own business and let the Radleys mind theirs. They had a right to. But when it happened, Jim said Atticus shook his head and said, mm, mm. So Jim received most of his information from Miss Stephanie Crawford, a neighborhood scout, oh, one of our words, who said she knew the whole thing. She like one of those nosy neighbors you have that's in everybody's business but her own. According to Miss Stephanie, Boo was sitting in the living room cutting some items from the Macomb Tribune to paste in his scrapbook. His father entered the room. As Mr. Radley passed by, Boo drove the scissors into his parents' leg, pulled them out, wiped them on his pants, and resumed his activities. What in the world, Boo Radley? Mrs. Radley ran screaming into the street that Arthur was killing them all. But when the sheriff arrived, he found Boo still sitting in the living room cutting up the Tribune. He was 33 years old then, giving you some good details about Boo Radley. Miss Stephanie said old Mr. Radley said no Radley was going to any asylum, keyword, when it was suggested that a season in Tuscaloosa might be helpful to Boo. Boo, next page, wasn't crazy. He was high strung at times. It was all right to shut him up, Mr. Radley conceded, but insisted that Boo not be charged with anything. He was not a criminal. The sheriff hadn't the heart to put him in jail alongside Negroes, so Boo was locked in the courthouse basement. Boo's transition from the basement back home was nebulous, keyword. I see you snapping over there, Roberto, in Jim's memory. Miss Stephanie Crawford said some of the town council told Mr. Radley that if he didn't take Boo back, Boo would die of mold from the damp. Besides, Boo could not live forever on the bounty of the county. Nobody knew what form of intimidation Mr. Radley employed to help keep Boo out of sight. But Jim figured that Mr. Radley kept him chained to the bed most of the time. Jesus. Atticus said no, it wasn't that sort of thing, that there were other ways of making people into ghosts. My memory came alive to see Mrs. Radley occasionally open the front door, walk to the edge of the porch, and pour water on her cannas, flowers. But every day, Jim and I would see Mr. Radley walking to and from town. He was a thin, leathery man with colorless eyes, so colorless that they did not reflect light. Ooh, scary. Looks like some of y'all. His cheekbones were sharp and his mouth was wide, with a thin upper lip and a full lower lip. Miss Stephanie Crawford said he was so upright he took the word of God as his only law, and we believed her because Mr. Radley's posture was ramrod straight. He never spoke to us. When we passed, we would look at the ground and say, Good morning, sir, and he would call in reply. Mr. Radley's elder son lived in Pensacola. He came home at Christmas, and he was one of the few persons we ever saw enter or leave the place. From the day Mr. Radley took Arthur home, people said the house died. But there came a day when Atticus told us he'd wear us out if we made any noise in the yard and commissioned Calpurnia to serve in his absence if she heard a sound of us. Mr. Radley was dying. He took his time about it. Wooden sawhorses blocked the road at each end of the Radley lot. Straw was put down on the sidewalk. Traffic was diverted to the back street. Dr. Reynolds parked his car in front of our house, and Jim walked to the Radleys every time he called. Jim and I crept around the yard for days. At last, the sawhorses were taken away, and we stood watching from the front porch when Mr. Radley made his final journey past our house. There goes the meanest man ever God blew breath into, murmured Calpurnia, and she spat meditatively into the yard. We looked at her in surprise, for Calpurnia rarely commented on the ways of white people. Oh, she bold. The neighborhood thought when Mr. Radley went under, Boo would come out, but it had another thing coming. Boo's elder brother returned from Pensacola and took Mr. Radley's place. The only difference between him and his father was their ages. Jim said Mr. Nathan Radley bought cotton too, meaning he ain't do nothing. Mr. Nathan would speak to us, however, when we said good morning, and sometimes we saw him coming from town with the magazine in his hand. The more we told Dill about the Radleys, the more he wanted to know. The longer he would stand hugging the light pole on the corner, and the more he would wonder. Wonder what he does in there, he would murmur. Looks like he just stick his head out the door. Jim said he goes out all right when it's pitch dark. So I'm stopping here at the end of page 15. So right now you're going to take a few minutes and you're going to jot down some details for Miss Stephanie Crawford, Calpurnia Boo Radley. Also, at the very end of 15, Dill, some things about Dill came into mind. So you're going to go ahead and do those first 4 bullet points, make them short and sweet. When you're ready for the last part 3, come back.